The call that changed everything. It was just another regular Tuesday, the kind where the hours crawl slower than a snail uphill. I was in my office, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, eyes glued to a spreadsheet I had already reviewed 3 times. The hum of the ceiling fan above buzzed like a lazy fly, and my inbox blinked with unopened messages I wasn't ready to face. That's when my phone buzzed on the desk. A name popped up that made me blink. Malik. My brother and I weren't exactly the kind who called just to catch up. He lived out in Hawaii, running one of those jaw-droppingly expensive resorts tourists fly thousands of miles to photograph. Our conversations were rare, usually reserved for birthdays and the occasional holiday check-in. So a random call from him in the middle of the day? It wasn't normal. I picked up, already expecting something odd. "Hey, little bro," he said, casual as always. "What's up, Malik?" I leaned back in my chair, waiting. There was a pause. "Quick question. Where's your wife?" I blinked. "She's on a business trip," I answered slowly. "In New York. She left Sunday." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. "You sure about that?" Something in his voice shifted. No longer casual. "Not joking." "Why do you ask?" I said, my voice tightening. "Because," he sighed, "I'm standing in the lobby of the resort right now. And I swear on Mom's good name, your wife is right in front of me. She just checked in. With another man." The room fell silent. I thought I misheard him. "What?" "She's here," Malik said again, lowering his voice. "Barefoot in a sundress. With a guy who looks like he belongs on a cologne ad. And she just paid for the honeymoon suite using your ATM card." I didn't breathe for a moment. My hand froze on the mouse. The coffee suddenly tasted like sand in my mouth. I stared at the monitor, but the spreadsheet no longer made sense. My ears rang. My jaw clenched. But somehow, I kept my voice steady. "Are you sure it's her?" "Positive," he replied. I waved at her. She waved back. The silence stretched again. I rubbed my temple, trying to push away the pounding headache that had just formed behind my eyes. "All right," I said slowly. "Don't say anything else to her. Don't let her know you told me." "You got it," Malik said. "What do you want me to do?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was racing, but my mind was already shifting into something colder. I stood from my desk and walked to the window, watching the wind rustle the trees outside. My thoughts were a storm. Brielle, my wife of 6 years. I met her at a work seminar back when we were still nobodies. She was electric, sharp, confident, the kind of woman who didn't wait for doors to open. She kicked them down. We got along instantly. I paid for her last semester of grad school when her loan got denied. Supported her while she built her startup from scratch. Celebrated her wins like they were my own. And now, she was thousands of miles away, wrapped around another man on a beach, smiling like none of that mattered. I ended the call with Malik after a few more instructions, and I sat down heavily in my chair. I opened our banking app. The transaction history stared back at me like an accusation. $850, Ocean View room. $170, champagne brunch. $265, luxury couples massage. $320, catamaran sunset cruise. $2,430, total stolen joy. Each charge was a stab to the chest. Paid with my card. For the past few months, I'd felt something was off. She had started canceling date nights. Always tired. Overwhelmed at work. She'd pull away when I reached out. Dodge conversations with vague excuses. I chalked it up to stress. I didn't press. I gave her space. Turns out, I gave her room to cheat. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I wanted to throw something across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there. Quiet. Numb. Processing. Because in that moment, I realized something dangerous. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to get even. I wasn't going to burst into Hawaii demanding answers. I wasn't going to storm into her hotel suite and punch the guy in the face. That's what she'd expect. That's what she'd prepare for. But me? I was going to sit down. Think. Plan. By the time she realized what was happening, she wouldn't even know what hit her. I picked up the phone again. Called Malik back. "Keep watching," I said. "Tell me everything. And send photos if you can without getting caught." He agreed. He always liked a little drama, and for once, we were on the same team. Then I called my assistant and said I wouldn't be in the office the rest of the week. I closed my laptop. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on the couch, and stared at our wedding photo above the fireplace. I remembered the way she smiled that day, the vows she made, how her voice cracked when she said forever. I should have known then. Some people say forever, but they mean until the next shiny thing comes along. I clinked the glass against my teeth. She thought I was a fool, that I'd never find out. But she forgot who I am. She forgot that I pay attention, that I see patterns, that I built my life on structure and precision. She played a careless game in paradise. And now? Now, I was about to show her that betrayal has consequences. And Hawaii was about to become the last place she'd ever forget. Paradise exposed. The funny thing about betrayal is how it doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in like cold water under a door, slow at first, then soaking everything before you realize you're standing in a flood. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, letting it all soak in. The only sound was the clink of ice against glass and the slow creak of the ceiling fan above. I stared at the bank statements again, scrolling through the damage like it was a crime scene report. A couple spa package. Sunset cruise. Room service that could feed a football team. My name on every receipt, my money funding their fantasy. She had taken what we built and used it as a getaway fund for a fling. But I wasn't going to act rash. Not yet. Instead, I called Malik again. Describe him to me, I said, pouring another drink. He chuckled, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Tall, model-looking. You know the type. Skinny jeans and loafers on a beach, like he's allergic to sand. She kissed him on the cheek earlier. Held his hand. They looked too comfortable to be coworkers. I closed my eyes. He wasn't wrong. I already knew in my gut it wasn't business. Her emails had become vague lately. No more, be back Wednesday, or client meeting at 3. Just one-word replies or ghost-like silence. I told myself she was stressed, that she needed space. I gave her that, and she took it all the way to Hawaii. Thanks, man, I said. Keep an eye on her. Don't let her know you've said anything. Already on it, Malik replied. She booked the stay under your full name, by the way. No shame at all. Of course she did. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while. I thought about everything. The way she used to wait up for me when I worked late. The way she used to laugh at my terrible jokes. Somewhere along the line, that laughter had faded, and I didn't know when it happened. Or maybe I just didn't want to notice. The idea of confronting her right then burned through my chest like acid. I imagined flying down to Hawaii, bursting into their suite, catching them red-handed. But then I pictured her reaction. She'd probably gasp, cry, beg, deny, maybe even twist the narrative and say I invaded her privacy. Turn it into a story about how I didn't trust her. The victim would become the villain. No, I needed her to be exposed. But not just to me, to everyone. That meant no yelling, no throwing things, no drama, just facts. I pulled up my shared folder from our bank. Every transaction lit up like a breadcrumb trail. I made a new spreadsheet because I needed this to be organized. Cold, surgical. I labeled each entry by date, location, description, and amount. It wasn't hard to tell what was hers. She loved extravagant little things. Candlelit dinners, imported wine, spa facials with names that sounded like they belonged in science fiction movies. And the worst part? It was all billed from my side of the account. I felt like a ghost watching my life from outside. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen island, lit only by the fridge light, drafting a plan. I wasn't going to let her leave Hawaii with a tan and a smile. She'd arrive with betrayal and return with a legal storm. The next morning, I texted Malik, "Can you stall her tomorrow morning? Tell her she's been upgraded or some VIP beach experience. Just buy me time." He replied a few seconds later, "Easy. Consider it done. You cooking something up?" "Yeah," I texted. "I'm done being quiet." Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Joan. She and I went to college together, and she was the kind of person who could hack into a vending machine and get it to give free snacks for a week. Now, she was a cybersecurity consultant for a law firm and freelanced on the side. When I explained what I needed, she didn't even flinch. "I'll send you a tracker that links to a live purchase log," she said. "Give me access to the joint account, and I'll feed everything into a private sheet. Can you match it to GPS locations?" I asked. She laughed. "You want time, place, and context? You got it. I'll have it by tonight." "Thanks, Joan. I'll make it worth your time." "You already have," she said. "I love a good revenge story." I hung up, and for the first time in hours, I smiled. Because now it wasn't just about the heartbreak. It was about reclaiming control. I texted Malik again, "Send me a picture." Just one. An hour later, a photo came through. The two of them standing near the beach bar. She was holding a coconut drink with a pink umbrella. Her hair was down, those expensive sunglasses perched on her head, and her hand, resting gently on his chest. I zoomed in. No guilt, no shame, just smiles. That's when something inside me snapped into place. The man I had been, trusting, loyal, maybe a little too forgiving. He was gone. The man who stood in his place? He was calculating, focused. I saved the photo and added it to a folder on my laptop labeled Paradise Files. Next, I started gathering copies of all her recent emails and texts. She'd sent the travel confirmation from her work address to his personal one and carelessly CC'd herself. I pulled every digital receipt, every itinerary, every piece of proof. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed someone licensed in Hawaii. Malik gave me a name, Tony. Civil attorney, sharp as glass, known for taking down big players with nothing but a folder and a raised eyebrow. I emailed her my evidence. 30 minutes later, we were on a Zoom call. I don't just want a divorce, I told her. I want a financial claim. Fraudulent use of funds. And I want her served while she's still in Hawaii. Tony raised an eyebrow. You're not messing around. Not anymore, I said. She nodded. Send everything. I'll draft a claim. When do you land? I hesitated. I haven't booked the flight yet. Well, she smiled. You'd better hurry. Paradise doesn't stay quiet forever. And with that, I closed the laptop, leaned back, and looked at the photo one more time. Brielle thought she was living her best life. But she had no idea I was about to turn her paradise into a courtroom. I wasn't just exposing her. I was preparing to bury the fantasy, publicly, legally, and with precision. And I would be watching every moment of it unfold. My brother, my ally. Growing up, Malik and I were never exactly best friends. We were just two boys under one roof, with different minds and different paths. He liked beaches and breezes. I liked books and balance sheets. While I stayed on the mainland, building a quiet life, he went off to Hawaii and turned a crumbling beachfront property into a luxury resort that made headlines. We didn't fight, but we didn't bond either. At least not until now. Betrayal has a strange way of rearranging loyalties. It was 2 days after Malik's call. I was sitting in my car, parked at the edge of a cliffside overlook just outside the city. The kind of place where you go to think, or maybe to scream when no one's around. I had the ocean in the distance, cold, gray, unforgiving, and my phone glowing in my palm. All right, Malik said on the other end. Here's what I got. He had gone full investigator on my behalf. The kind of effort you only make when blood actually means something. Reservation details are all under your name, he began. She booked the honeymoon suite for 6 nights. Confirmed through your shared bank card. All-inclusive. Champagne welcome. Turn-down service. Ocean view. I closed my eyes. Send me the documents. Already in your inbox, he said. And I've pulled security footage too. Discreet angles. Nothing invasive, but enough to show they're not just coworkers. You sure? I asked, jaw tight. Trust me, he said flatly. She's not talking business. They're kissing by the pool bar. Arms around each other. I even saw them dancing last night at the luau. A knot twisted in my stomach. She ever say anything to you? I asked, wondering if she tried to lie to his face. Nope. Just smiled like everything was fine. Didn't even flinch when I greeted her. She said she was just taking a break from work stress. I didn't let on. Good. And him? I asked. What's his story? Malik exhaled through the speaker. Name's Levi. I asked a few staff members to poke around. Turns out he's some kind of marketing manager at a firm in California. Mid-30s. Works out a lot. Acts like he's God's gift to women. Perfect, I muttered. The cliché of clichés. You want me to do more digging? No, I said. I've got someone else helping on that front. Because I did. Joan. She'd already sent me a Google sheet, color-coded, organized, time-stamped, with every purchase Brielle made using our joint account since she landed. Even GPS coordinates were included, pinged from the stores and restaurants she visited. It read like a travel brochure from hell, and every entry had my name on it. My next move was to tighten the circle. I needed more than emotional damage. I needed legal ground. So I called Joan again. Hey, she said, picking up on the second ring. Your sheet's updated. You should take a look at row 35. I opened it. Item, boutique jewelry set. Amount, $860. Note, gift wrapped, signed to my future, handwriting confirmed to match Brielle. My hands tightened around the phone. She used my card to buy him a gift? Joan didn't answer. She didn't have to. Keep tracking, I said. I want every dollar mapped out. I want a full timeline. I want to know what they touched, where they stayed, what they wore. You're getting dangerous, she said, half amused, half impressed. No, I replied. I'm getting smart. After hanging up, I contacted Tony, the civil attorney Malik had recommended. She was sharp, fast, and completely unbothered by the scale of the drama. I've reviewed the files you sent, she said during our second call. I can easily build a claim here. Fraudulent use of joint funds, emotional distress, misrepresentation. If you want to press charges or serve her papers while she's still on the island, I can help you file the paperwork within 48 hours. Make it happen. Just be aware, she said carefully, this could go public. I don't care. That night, Malik emailed me the video clips. The first one started with soft music playing in the background, one of the resort's live bands. The camera angle showed Brielle and Levi swaying together under string lights, his hands on her waist. She leaned in, whispered something in his ear. He laughed, and then she kissed him, right there, on the dance floor. The same floor where I once danced with her during a retreat Malik hosted 3 years ago. Back when she still reached for my hand in public. Back when she still looked at me like I mattered. I closed the video, not out of pain, but out of certainty. I was done being blindsided. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was business. She turned our marriage into a transaction. So I would treat the fallout like a contract gone wrong. Anything else you need? Malik asked when I called to check in again. I need access to her suite, I said. Not to break in. Just gather intel. He hesitated. That's a gray area. She left the door open when she used my name and my card. I have a right to know what's happening under my account. I might have a guy, he said slowly. His name's Kai. Been with me 6 years. Discreet. Loyal. I trust him. Send him in. Quietly. Don't take anything. Just eyes. You got it. As the plan started to take shape, I began drafting a master document. I titled it Operation Island Exit. It included bank statements, email screenshots, timeline of lies, photos and videos from Malik, spreadsheet from Joan, drafted legal complaint from Tony. All of it stacked neatly into a folder I kept on an encrypted drive. The evidence was clear. The betrayal was proven. But still, I hadn't called her. She had no idea what was coming. That silence? It was my favorite part. Because there's something powerful about letting someone walk deeper into the fire, believing they're in the sun. They sip champagne, post beach photos, smile in the mirror. And all the while, the ground beneath them is starting to crack. By the end of the week, it wouldn't be a beach beneath her feet. It would be a courtroom. The setup. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a liar smile while walking straight into a trap. And in this case, the trap came with ocean views and complimentary mimosas. I landed in Honolulu just before noon on a Friday, stepping off the plane with a single carry-on, dark sunglasses, and a name that wasn't mine. I booked my hotel under an alias, Mr. Hayes, a name I used once for an old fantasy football league. It felt ironic now. That identity, unlike my marriage, was still intact. I didn't stay at Malik's resort. That would have been reckless. Instead, I checked into a boutique hotel just a few blocks away, one of those eco-luxury places where no one asks questions as long as you tip well and look tired. I kept to myself. No loud calls. No public scenes. Just observation, coordination, and silence. Malik met me later that evening at a small cafe near the marina. He wore flip-flops and a linen shirt, blending in with the tourists. Me? I still hadn't changed out of my travel clothes. I wasn't here to relax. She's still playing the perfect guest, Malik said, sipping his drink. She booked a couple's kayak tour for tomorrow morning. With him? I asked. He nodded. And they added a spa session for 2 in the afternoon. She's using the card like it prints money. She doesn't suspect a thing? Not a hint. She's floating. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the docked boats. The setting sun bounced off the water like liquid fire. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a countdown. All right, I said. Let's move forward. Introduce me to your attorney friend. The next morning, Malik set up a quiet meeting with Tony Rivera, a civil attorney whose office overlooked the edge of Diamond Head. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a confidence that made it clear she didn't lose often. I've reviewed the documentation, she said, gesturing to the thick folder I'd provided. You've got solid grounds, financial misconduct, fraudulent use of joint funds, and emotional distress. More importantly, We can file here, But if you wanted to hit harder, we wait until she's mid-trip. Let her think everything's perfect, then drop the hammer. I nodded. Make her feel untouchable. Then remind her she's not. Tony smiled. My kind of client. That afternoon, I returned to my hotel and reviewed the latest batch of updates from Joan. The spreadsheet had grown. More dinners, jewelry, a private snorkel tour. One transaction labeled Lover's Cove Picnic Basket Premium. That one stung. Not because of the money, but because we'd done that same picnic 2 years ago. It had been her idea then. Now, it was recycled romance for someone else. I closed the laptop and called Malik. Time for the next phase, I said. Card switch, he asked. Yes. Can Kai handle it? Kai was Malik's right-hand man. Quiet, unshakable, the kind of guy you could trust to carry secrets to the grave. Malik once said Kai had fixed a blackout during a hurricane with duct tape and a screwdriver. I'll brief him tonight, Malik replied. We'll do it tomorrow morning when she comes down for breakfast. Tell him to be fast. Clean. No errors. The plan was simple. Malik would stage a billing issue at the front desk that required Brielle's physical presence. Something like a hold error on the room. While she was down arguing, Kai would enter the suite, swap her real ATM card with an identical dummy, and leave everything else untouched. When she tried to use it later that day, nothing would work. Her picture-perfect vacation would collapse by degrees, each swipe a reminder that control was slipping. By the time the sun rose, everything was in motion. Malik called me around 10 a.m. She's at the desk now, he whispered, giving my staff the fake smile. Is Kai in? Already in and out. Like a ghost. I grinned. Perfect. Later that afternoon, Joan messaged me. No activity on the real card since 10:13 a.m. Looks like the decoy's in full effect. That was the moment I finally felt the shift. The balance tipping. I imagined her standing at the register of some boutique shop, sunglasses in one hand, disappointment curling her lips as the cashier shook their head. Card declined. Swipe again. Declined. Confusion. Embarrassment. Panic. Malik confirmed it. They went to the jewelry store in Waikiki, he said. She tried to buy a gold chain. Got declined. Tried again. Nothing. Levi looked confused. She looked pissed. And now, they're back at the resort. She's on the phone with someone. Probably the bank. Or maybe you. I chuckled. Let her call. I didn't answer, of course. I wasn't ready yet. She had to sit in it longer. But I wasn't done. I crafted a short message on a white piece of paper and sealed it in an envelope. Then I printed one of the clearest screenshots of her kissing Levi on the beach and added it inside. On the paper, I wrote just one line. Smile. You're not on vacation anymore. I handed it to Malik in the lobby that evening. Deliver this to her tomorrow morning. Hand it to her personally. Say it's from a private guest. Then walk away. He turned the envelope over in his hand. She's gonna lose it. That's the point. That night, I returned to my quiet hotel room. I stood by the window, watching the ocean crash against the rocks, and thought about the man I had been just 1 week ago. Blind, tired, trying to fix something that was already broken. Now, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just making sure the wreckage had my signature on it. The next morning, Malik called me with a chuckle in his voice. She opened it in the breakfast lounge, he said. Went pale like someone kicked the chair out from under her. Levi asked what it was. She told him it was nothing. Then she stormed off to her suite. I smiled, staring at the rising sun outside my window. Good. She's gonna blow soon, Malik added. She already did, I said calmly. She just doesn't know it yet. I ended the call, finished my coffee, and zipped up my suitcase. It was time to go home, not because I was finished, but because the real show was about to begin. And she still had no idea the cameras were rolling. The card switch. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a perfect setup. It's not empty, it's loaded. Like the air right before a storm breaks, or the hush that settles in a courtroom when the verdict is about to be read. That's the silence I sat in the morning after Malik delivered the envelope. A thick, waiting kind of silence. I didn't rush it. I let the clock do the work. At exactly 11:03 a.m., the first call came through. Brielle. I watched her name flash across my screen. I didn't move. Let it ring. Then another. Then another. I muted the phone and slid it face down across the counter. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. I'd imagined this part for days, the unraveling. But nothing compared to the real-time thrill of watching her world sink slowly beneath her feet. She called 6 more times over the next 2 hours. I didn't pick up. Meanwhile, Joan kept feeding me live updates from the card tracker. Or rather, the lack of them. Declined again. She messaged at 12:12 p.m., this time at a beachside cafe. She tried 3 times. The beautiful thing about revenge done right is that it's not loud. It doesn't slam doors or scream accusations. It whispers truth into places where lies used to live. That's what this card switch was. Not revenge in the classic sense, but revelation. One swipe at a time. Malik texted me mid-afternoon. She's asking everyone at the front desk why her card isn't working. She thinks it's a hotel error. Let her. I replied. I imagined her standing there in that overpriced sundress, trying to smile while confusion bloomed across her face. Levi probably standing nearby, arms crossed, wondering what she was hiding. I wondered if he knew the room they were staying in was booked under my name. If you noticed that every time she signed a receipt, it was with a last name she swore she wasn't proud of anymore. But the best was yet to come. I had prepared a second envelope, this one heavier, thicker, stuffed with truth. Inside, I had placed a printed bank statement, with every line highlighted that matched their trip. A spreadsheet compiled by Joan, organized by date, location, and cost. The resort's room booking confirmation, bearing my full name. A divorce petition drafted by Tony. And finally, a neatly labeled USB drive. That USB? It contained the video footage Malik had collected. Their slow dances, hand-holding, laughing under tiki lights, the kiss by the bar, all time-stamped, all in high resolution. This wasn't just evidence, it was a story. A timeline of betrayal, wrapped in facts. And it was about to land directly in her hands. I made one last call to Malik that evening. You sure about this? He asked, though his voice already held the answer. She took a vacation on my dime, I said. She can handle a wake-up call. The next morning, Malik approached her in the hotel lobby, same as before. Mrs. Thorne, he said. I laughed when he told me later she didn't correct him. She was so used to pretending, she forgot to drop the act. This was left for you by a guest, he added, handing her the envelope. She took it without question. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. I didn't answer. Then Malik called. She opened it in the suite, he said. I couldn't see her, but one of the cleaning staff said she threw something against the wall. Then she started shouting. Levi. He left the room 10 minutes later. Looked like someone had slapped him in the face. Did she chase after him? Nope. She slammed the door. He walked down to the pool bar alone. Asked for tequila at 10 a.m. That was almost poetic. I could picture him standing there in his beach shirt, staring out at the waves, suddenly realizing he was just a prop in someone else's mess. That everything she promised him, freedom, love, adventure, was built on stolen money and borrowed names. Later that evening, I got a call from Tony. She's officially been served, she said. Divorce petition, financial claim, and all supporting evidence. We have documentation of receipt. She knows she's been caught. And the lawsuit? Filed. We'll follow up once she returns to the mainland. But based on the footage and your bank records, the case is solid. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast to victory or call friends to brag. I just stood on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the tide roll in, listening to the soft hush of the waves meeting sand. I thought about everything. 6 years of marriage. Countless sacrifices. Quiet nights where I stayed up late finishing her pitch decks. The way she used to rest her head on my shoulder when she couldn't sleep. The little things that build a life. And how, one by one, she tore them down for a man who couldn't even pay for his own cocktails. Somewhere down there, in another hotel suite, she was pacing, panicking, scrambling to call banks, lawyers, anyone who would listen. But the truth? No one could help her now. She betrayed the one person who actually would have stood by her. She mistook kindness for weakness. And when she decided to treat our marriage like a game, she forgot one important thing. I never lose when I know the rules. And now, I was the one writing them. By the next morning, she had checked out. Malik texted me. She left in a rush. Didn't speak to anyone. Levi's gone too. Good, I replied. I boarded my return flight that afternoon. No first class. No upgrades. I didn't need luxury. I had peace. And sometimes, that's more valuable than anything money can buy. I sat by the window, watching the clouds shift outside, feeling lighter than I had in months. There were still battles ahead, court dates, settlements, a property division. But the hardest part was over. She'd seen the truth. She'd tasted what it felt like to be powerless. And she'd know, forever, that the man she tried to deceive wasn't the fool she thought he was. He was the one with the final move. The panic call. It was 5:41 a.m. when my phone rang again. I had just returned home the night before, dropped my bag by the door, and walked straight to the shower without turning on a single light. I needed to rinse off Hawaii. Rinse off the smell of betrayal, the lingering sin of ocean wind and lies. I hadn't even unpacked. The suitcase set untouched by the bedroom wall, and my phone, on silent, buzzed to life on the nightstand. The screen lit up. Brielle. I let it ring. Then again. And again. She called 9 times in less than 20 minutes before I finally picked up. I didn't say a word at first. I just let the weight of the silence reach her through the line. Hello, she said, voice small. I stayed quiet. Where are you? She asked, sounding like she hadn't slept. I finally spoke, my voice calm, even. Back home. There was a pause on her end. I could hear background noise, doors closing, maybe footsteps. She was probably pacing. You're home, she repeated. Why? What's going on? I could almost hear her trying to piece it together, but nothing she'd prepared would have fit what she was walking into. Why is my card not working? She demanded, her voice rising with desperation. Why did it get declined at every store yesterday? I called the bank, and they said there was a freeze on it. Did you do something? Did I do something? I repeated slowly. That's rich. Listen, she began quickly, this whole thing. I know how it looks, but it's not. Don't, I interrupted. She went quiet. I stood at the window of my house, looking out at the neighborhood just beginning to stir. Sprinklers ticked on across lawns. Early joggers passed by with earbuds in, completely unaware that on this call, a marriage was being dissected piece by piece. You told me you were in New York, I said plainly. You packed a suitcase and kissed me goodbye and said you were meeting a client uptown. I was, she lied. You weren't, I said. You were in Hawaii, at my brother's resort, with another man. I heard her inhale sharply. And you used my card, I continued, my voice still low, still cold. Every cocktail, every massage, every dinner, every room service bill, you swiped with my name. You made reservations in my name. You laid in bed with another man, in a suite I paid for. Wait, she said, stumbling over her words. It's not like that. Don't lie again, Brielle. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she snapped, desperation cracking her voice now. It was a mistake. It just happened. You planned the trip. There was silence. You bought the tickets. You forwarded the itinerary to him. You used my funds to do it. That's not a mistake, Brielle. That's a choice. I let that hang in the air. She didn't respond. You don't understand, she finally whispered. I've been feeling lost, alone. You've been distant. You've been working so much. No, I cut in. Don't do that. Don't blame my job. Don't act like loneliness is a permission slip for betrayal. You could have talked to me. You could have told me something wasn't right. Instead, you packed a bag, smiled in my face, and flew to paradise to play house with someone else. There was no defense. She knew it. Her voice broke. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It just got complicated. I was confused. You weren't confused when you booked a luxury suite. You weren't confused when you bought him a necklace with my card. She gasped. How do you know that? I know everything, I said. Every charge. Every location. Every video. Every lie. She was completely silent now. You really thought you'd get away with it? I asked. You thought I'd sit here while you dipped into our account and took a vacation with someone else? She stammered. I needed something different. I didn't plan on hurting you, I swear. I still love you. I almost laughed. No, Brielle, I said. You love what I gave you. The stability. The money. The image. You loved the version of me that didn't know what you were doing. She cried then. Quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort. I don't know what to do, she said between sobs. I made a mistake. You'll get a package by 9 a.m., I said calmly. What? In your suite. Courtesy of the hotel manager. Open it. Read everything inside. Then pack your things and check out. You'll be flying home alone. She sniffled. What's in it? Reality, I said. Something you've been avoiding. I can fix this, she pleaded. Please. I know I hurt you, but I'll do anything. Just tell me how to make this right. You can't, I said. This isn't about hurt anymore. It's about who you chose to be when you thought I wasn't watching. But I didn't mean to fall for him, she whispered. And there it was. The truth. I didn't even flinch. Brielle, I said slowly. You chose him. You booked the flight. You packed the bags. You shared the bed. You used my card to fund the fantasy. That's not something that just happens. That's effort. That's intention. Silence. And then the smallest voice I had ever heard from her. I'm scared. You should be. The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. Maybe she thought I'd soften. Maybe she thought I'd say, come home, or we'll figure this out. But I'd figured it out already. And she no longer had a place in it. I have to go, I said. Wait. But I hung up. I stood in the quiet of the house for a long while after that. The walls felt a little wider. The air, a little clearer. Like the house had been holding its breath too, and now it was free to exhale. I went downstairs, brewed a fresh cup of coffee, and took it out onto the porch. The sky was turning gold. Birds chirped in the trees. For the first time in a long time, I felt still. No more guessing. No more wondering. Just truth. I didn't need to yell or scream to win. All I had to do was stop pretending she was someone she never intended to be. And soon, when she opened that package, she'd realize just how much pretending had cost her. The envelope of consequences. The sun rose in Honolulu like it always did, calm, golden, promising. But for Brielle, this morning was going to be different. I imagined her waking up in the luxury suite, the ocean breeze slipping through the curtains, the faint sound of waves in the distance. For a moment, maybe she even forgot everything. Maybe she reached for Levi. Maybe she still hoped this was just a bad dream. But dreams don't come with documents. At exactly 9 a.m., Malik followed through on our agreement. He walked up to the suite, knocked twice, and handed her a second envelope, this one thicker than the last. He didn't say a word, just smiled politely, turned around, and walked away. Inside that envelope was the end of everything she thought she had control over. The divorce petition was printed on crisp, white paper with bold lettering and Tony's law firm's insignia at the top. It detailed every violation of trust, every financial abuse, every legal reason I had for terminating the marriage. No fluff, just facts. Alongside that, I had included a formal restraining order against her access to all joint accounts, investments, and property titles. Tony's team had frozen everything. The house, the cars, the business assets. Brielle now had no access to anything we had built together. Also included was a breakdown, a full spreadsheet, color-coded, labeled, with every single dollar she had spent using my name. There were receipts from the resort, restaurants, designer stores, and even gas stations. Each row was a nail in the coffin. Joan had done an exceptional job organizing it all, and it looked less like a document and more like a prosecution case file. But what truly mattered, the thing that would take her breath away, was the final item in the envelope. A small black USB drive, neatly labeled. Inside that USB was the footage. For separate clips, each captured with date and timestamps from Malik's security system. There was no ambiguity, no grainy, low-resolution blur to dispute. The kiss under the tiki lights, the hand on her thigh at the poolside lounge, the giggling as she leaned on Levi during the luau, the way she leaned into his neck as they walked back to the suite at night. It was all there. And he, Levi, was just as exposed. That's the part she hadn't thought through. He worked for a firm in San Diego. Brielle once told me it was conservative, uptight, known for firing employees over office romances and inappropriate social behavior. She never thought I'd find out. Never thought Malik would track the footage. Never imagined I'd take it this far. But I had. Because love wasn't the point anymore. Dignity was. I got a call from Malik about 30 minutes after he delivered the envelope. You're not going to believe what just happened, he said, half laughing. Try me, I replied. She came down to the lobby in a fury, holding the envelope like it had bitten her. Demanded to speak to management. Then she demanded to speak to me. And I asked. I met her outside the main doors, he said. She started yelling, asking if I was working with you. She said it was invasion of privacy. I let her talk. Smart. Then Levi came out. He looked shaken. I think he saw the video. I leaned back in my chair. He knows. Oh, yeah. His face said it all. He wasn't furious. He was terrified. Probably realized the kind of fallout he's about to walk into. Good. They argued right there, in front of everyone, Malik said. She said something about fixing it. He said something about lawyers. Then he just walked off. Didn't even wait for her. That part didn't surprise. She had traded 6 years of real for 6 days of illusion. And now she was left holding an envelope full of truths and a name no one wanted to be associated with. Later that day, I received an email from Tony's assistant. Everything had been filed. The claims were active. The documents had been notarized and verified. I now had legal separation pending trial and a strong financial misconduct case. And the startup I helped Brielle launch? I had already removed her from the accounts. Back when we set up the LLC, she didn't pay attention to the fine print. I had retained majority control with 60% equity, standard protection in case she ever wanted to sell early. I never thought I'd use it this way, but now it felt like insurance. I sent a notice of removal to her business email that evening. Effective immediately, she was out. No longer CEO, no longer partner, no longer tied to anything I built. The final blow came when Malik told me Levi's company had received a forwarded copy of the video. Not by me, of course not. But someone anonymous, someone who simply labeled the email, thought your HR department might want to see this. I didn't have to ask who sent it. Joan. She always did have a flair for timing. By that night, the fallout was in full swing. I stayed up reading a book I'd been trying to finish for months. Something about quiet resilience and rebuilding after a storm. Funny how I understood it better now. My phone buzzed once more. A text from an unknown number. Please. Can we talk? Just once. Please. I didn't respond. Because what was there left to say? She had poured gasoline on our life and lit the match, thinking I wouldn't notice the smoke. But now, she was choking on the fumes. She had lied to my face, spent my money, kissed another man under my brother's roof, and thought all she had to do was cry her way out of it. Not this time. I walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the cool night air, letting it settle in my lungs. There was no need for revenge anymore. I'd already won. Not through rage. Not through violence. Through evidence. Through calm. Through the truth. Let people call me cold. Let them say I overreacted. Because in the end, she tried to write me out of the story we built together. But I held the pen, and she just got edited out. Grounded and exposed. When I stepped off the plane back home, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry either. What I felt, oddly enough, was quiet. A kind of stillness that settled in my chest like dust after a storm. I wasn't coming home from a war. I was coming home from a revelation. And the man who had left just a week ago wasn't the same man walking into this house now. I took my time walking through the front door. Everything was exactly as I left it. The shoes neatly by the door. The vase with dried lavender still sitting untouched on the dining table. But the energy had changed. It was no longer our house. It was mine. Completely, irrevocably mine. Before I even unpacked, I did what needed to be done. First, I changed the locks. A locksmith came within the hour. I didn't explain why. I didn't need to. The man simply did the job, took the payment, and nodded before leaving me standing with a brand new set of keys and a fresh bolt on the past. Next, I contacted my bank and finalized the financial separation. Our joint accounts were already frozen, thanks to Tony, but now I made it permanent. No more access. No more loopholes. Every dime was accounted for, every transaction traced. I wasn't just protecting myself, I was securing peace. Then I cleared the house. Not of furniture or memories, just of her. Everything that belonged to Brielle, her clothes, shoes, makeup, books, favorite mugs, even her yoga mat, I boxed up and stored in the garage. I didn't throw anything out. That would have been too easy. Instead, I put it all neatly into labeled bins, and I left a simple note on top. Collected. Categorized. Claimed. You can coordinate pickup through your attorney. I didn't need her setting foot back inside. She had already stomped enough mud through the floorboards of my trust. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a stack of papers, signed responses from her legal team. She wasn't fighting the divorce. Not directly. Not yet. But the tone of the reply was careful, curated, designed to slow things down. Too late for that. The next morning, she flew back. Alone. Malik had texted me the moment she checked out. She's leaving today. First class. No Levi. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But I knew the storm was about to move from Hawaii to here. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, there she was, standing at the front door like someone who forgot they no longer lived here. She had sunglasses on, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and that same duffel bag she'd taken to Hawaii slung over her shoulder like nothing had changed. She rang the bell twice. I watched her from the upstairs hallway monitor. I didn't rush. I let her stand there. Let her feel the weight of waiting. Then I pressed the intercom button. Brielle. She looked around, confused. Can you open the door? This property is no longer shared, I said evenly. You'll receive further instructions through your attorney. Her face changed immediately. Wait, what? Are you serious right now? I flew back to fix this. You flew back alone, I said. That was your first clue. She stepped closer to the door. Please, just let me in. We can talk. There's nothing to talk about. Come on, you don't mean that. You said you needed space. You took it. In Hawaii. With another man. That was a mistake. No, I interrupted. It was a pattern. I paused. You broke this, Brielle. Not just once. Not just with one kiss. You made a decision every single day of that trip. And now, you're facing the cost. She was visibly shaking. People make mistakes. People do, I agreed. But not everyone betrays the person who gave them everything. The silence that followed was heavy. Then her voice cracked. The neighbors are staring. I looked down from the window. Sure enough, across the street, old Mrs. Callahan had paused mid-sprinkler. A man jogging with his dog slowed to glance over. Even the mailman took a second look before heading back to his van. I'm not the one who should be embarrassed, I said. You made this public the moment you tried to hide it. Her lips trembled. You really hate me now, don't you? No, I replied. Hate takes too much energy. And I'm done giving you mine. I ended the intercom call. She stood there for another 30 seconds. Then she walked to the curb, where her Uber was still waiting, and climbed in without looking back. That evening, her parents called. I debated whether to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello, I said. There was a moment of hesitation. Hi, her mother said, her voice tightly wound. We heard about everything. We just wanted to hear your side. You want my side? Yes, her father added. Brielle's upset. She says it wasn't what it looked like. It never is, I said. Well? She went to Hawaii with another man. She used my bank card. She booked the suite under my name. She lied to all of us. If you're looking for someone to feel sorry for, I'm not him. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, her mother said finally. We didn't know. No, I replied. You just didn't ask. I hung up. I didn't owe them closure. Not when they'd spent 6 years turning a blind eye to the cracks she caused and calling them character. That night, I sat on the back patio with a glass of water and watched the sky turn orange. The same sky we used to sit under together, laughing at silly TV shows and dreaming about our future. Now, I sat under it alone, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The house was no longer filled with tension. No walking on eggshells. No late-night text I wasn't supposed to see. No phone calls that ended the second I stepped into the room. Just silence. And silence, when it's finally honest, is the loudest kind of peace. I walked back inside, past the row of labeled boxes in the garage, and shut the door behind me. She had returned home thinking she could fix it with words. But some bridges burned so clean, there's nothing left to walk across. The final confrontation. A month later, I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4B, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, holding nothing but a leather folder and calm resolve. The hallway buzzed quietly, shuffling feet, muffled conversations, the occasional call for silence. But all of it faded to a dull murmur as I stood by the bench, waiting for her. Brielle arrived 5 minutes late. She looked nothing like the woman who had stepped onto a Hawaiian beach in a sundress and sunglasses. Today, she wore a navy skirt suit, her hair pulled tight into a bun, as heavy with something between regret and stubbornness. Beside her was a sharp-looking attorney with an expensive briefcase and the kind of practiced smirk that only existed in courtrooms and overpriced divorce settlements. She didn't make eye contact. I didn't care. My attorney, Tony, stood beside me with quiet confidence, flipping through documents like she already knew how this would end. When the clerk called our case, we entered the courtroom and sat across from each other at 2 separate tables. The judge was a middle-aged woman with a steel gaze and a reputation for disliking unnecessary drama. Exactly who I'd hoped for. Tony opened with a calm summary of the case: financial misconduct, betrayal of marital trust, fraudulent use of shared assets. She spoke clearly, backed by dates, receipts, bank statements, and video footage we'd submitted into sealed evidence. Brielle's lawyer tried to counter with emotional appeals. Your Honor, he said, my client acknowledges that mistakes were made. But this was not a calculated attempt to harm her husband. This was the result of emotional distance in the marriage. My client felt isolated, neglected, and alone. She acted irrationally, yes, but not maliciously. Brielle lowered her eyes, like the weight of those words was hard to carry. The judge didn't blink. Tony rose smoothly. Your Honor, feeling neglected doesn't justify using your spouse's identity and financial accounts to fund an adulterous vacation. My client has presented proof of premeditation, booking details, duplicate reservations, and video footage showing sustained romantic engagement with another man. This was not spontaneous. This was a pattern. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents. Then she turned to Brielle. Mrs. Thorne, do you deny traveling to Hawaii with another man using your husband's financial information? Brielle looked up, her voice barely audible. No, Your Honor. Do you deny that the room, the meals, and the gifts were charged to your husband's account without his consent? Again, no, Your Honor. Do you deny that during this trip, you portrayed yourself as unmarried on official travel documents submitted to the resort and tour companies? Her attorney tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. I'd like to hear it from her. Brielle hesitated, then shook her head. I don't deny it. The judge nodded and leaned back in her chair. Thank you. Tony stood again and handed over the final exhibit, my written statement. The judge read it silently for a moment before placing it aside. Then it was my turn. Would you like to say anything? The judge asked. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked slowly to the witness platform. I didn't look at Brielle. Not once. My eyes stayed forward, my voice even. I was married for 6 years to a woman I thought I knew. I supported her through grad school, paid off her debts, helped launch her business. I built our life carefully, brick by brick. And one day, without warning, she took a sledgehammer to all of it and smiled like it was self-care. A few people in the gallery shifted. I continued. She planned a trip with another man. She lied to my face. She used our joint funds, my money, to finance a vacation she called a business trip. She bought jewelry for someone else while pretending to be someone else. She committed financial betrayal and emotional abandonment, all in one act. I paused. And when she got caught, she didn't apologize. She didn't come home and confess. She panicked because the fantasy fell apart. I finally turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at her. You had 6 years to make things work, I said softly. You chose a 5-day trip over a lifetime. I stepped back, nodded to the judge, and returned to my seat. The room was still. The judge adjusted her glasses, glanced at the stack of evidence once more, and gave her ruling. The court finds the evidence overwhelmingly in favor of the petitioner, she said firmly. The divorce is granted effective immediately. The house, bank assets, and startup business will be awarded to the petitioner in full. Additionally, the respondent will be required to repay $7,200 in misused funds, as documented. Brielle's lawyer tried to argue for reduced repayment. The judge cut him off. This is not a trial for emotional debate. The law is clear. Fraud has consequences. Brielle's shoulders sagged. She didn't speak. Outside the courtroom, I waited for a moment near the elevators. Not for her, but because Tony had stepped into the hall to take a call, and I needed to sign one last form. Brielle eventually approached. Alone. I glanced at her. She looked tired. Not the tired of missing sleep, but the tired that comes from carrying a story that finally collapsed. Can I say something? She asked. You just did. In court. She frowned. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I turned toward her fully. That's the problem, I said. You never meant for anything. You just let things happen, until you couldn't hide them anymore. I was confused, she said weakly. No, you were dishonest. I thought maybe after some time. There's no after, Brielle. She looked down, as if expecting that. Her voice was small again. Did you ever love me? I didn't flinch. I did. Completely. And you turned it into paperwork. Her eyes welled up, but I didn't comfort her. That time was gone. She opened her mouth to say something else, but I stepped past her as the elevator dinged. Tony returned, handed me the signed file, and we left. I didn't look back. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine and stood on my balcony again. The wind had picked up. The air had shifted. Somewhere down the road, Brielle would tell her version of the story. Maybe to friends. Maybe to someone new. Maybe even to herself. But I didn't care anymore. Because the story that mattered, the one with the truth, the proof, and the clean break, was finished. I had walked into court with facts and walked out with freedom. No screaming. No slamming doors. No dramatic exits. Just the quiet sound of closure. And the knowledge that I had rebuilt what she tried to tear down, with dignity intact. My life, rewritten. It's funny how peace doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't knock on your door with balloons or announce itself like a grand entrance. It comes quietly, softly, like a breeze drifting through an open window, reminding you that the storm is gone. That's how I felt waking up in my new apartment for the first time. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. My dog, yes, I finally got one, was curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. He was a rescue, a stubborn little mutt named Milo who liked to hog the blankets and bark at his reflection in the mirror. Somehow, his presence made the space feel lived in, real. Like I wasn't just existing, I was healing. The apartment wasn't big. One bedroom, one office, open kitchen. But everything in it was mine. Every item I brought in had meaning. The framed photos on the shelf were of friends, travels, and family. No wedding pictures. No half-hearted smiles. Just me, in all the honest moments that never required performance. A few weeks after the court hearing, I officially moved out of the house Brielle and I once shared. I didn't fight to keep it, even though the judge had awarded it to me. I didn't want to live in a museum of broken memories. I sold it. Got a good offer, too. Young couple, newly married, excited to start their life together. I let them have it. Let them fill the space with hope instead of history. Brielle didn't contest the sale. She barely said anything after the ruling. And I got back to living. I started biking again on Sundays, the way I used to before I met her. Just me and the wind, riding along the river trails with no destination, no schedule. I found new coffee shops, met neighbors, took cooking classes on Thursday nights because, for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about someone else's preferences. I didn't check her social media, didn't scroll through tagged photos, trying to see who she was with or what excuse she was giving the world. That chapter was closed. Reading it again wouldn't change the ending. Malik and I talk more now. The whole ordeal had brought us closer than years of birthdays and holidays ever did. We laughed about things now, small details that had once stung. You should have seen her face when the envelope landed, he'd said once over a call. Like someone handed her a live grenade. He came to visit a few weeks later. We grabbed dinner, sat on the rooftop of a local restaurant, and just talked. No tension, no rushed updates. Just two brothers who had been through something ugly and came out stronger for it. "You're different," he said, sipping his beer. "Better or worse?" "Better," he replied. "You look lighter. Like you're finally breathing." I nodded. "Feels that way too." Then there was Tony. What started as a purely professional connection had slowly grown into something I didn't expect. We stayed in touch after the case ended, initially about paperwork, then about life. One evening, we met for drinks at a quiet bar downtown. She looked different out of court, more relaxed, warmer. Her sharpness was still there, but it was softened by genuine curiosity. She asked how I was doing, not in the way people do to be polite, but like she really wanted to know. "I'm learning to be selfish again," I told her. She smiled. "Good. You earned that." By the end of the night, I realized I hadn't thought about Brielle once. Not her lies. Not the videos. Not the voice that once convinced me she'd never hurt me. Just me and the woman sitting across from me, sipping wine and laughing without pretense. It didn't turn into something overnight. I didn't dive into a rebound or force myself into romance. I let it unfold the way healing should: slow, steady, respectful. Maybe it becomes something more. Maybe it doesn't. But for once, I was okay with the uncertainty. One Saturday morning, I visited the place I used to sit with Brielle on our good days, an overlook that faced the city skyline, tucked behind a quiet park. I sat alone on the bench, watching the wind carry leaves across the path. I thought about everything she took from me, and everything I took back. She took my trust. I reclaimed it through boundaries. She took my finances. I rebuilt with intention. She took my dignity. I answered her betrayal with grace, strategy, and silence. People often say that revenge is best served cold, but I disagree. The best revenge is living a life so complete, so unapologetically peaceful, that the person who tried to destroy you ends up haunted by how little they mattered in the long run. Brielle had called me once, weeks after the court decision. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail on Neverly. "You were part of my good karma streak," she said, laughing. "Helping you gave me purpose again." "You saved me," I told her. "No," she replied. "You saved yourself. I just handed you the flashlight." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Because she was right. I could have chosen anger. I could have destroyed everything in my path just to feel powerful again. But instead, I chose clarity. I built spreadsheets, not shouting matches. I chose courtrooms, not chaos. I chose dignity when I had every right to explode. And because of that, I didn't just survive the betrayal, I redefined myself through it. Now, when people ask me what happened between us, I don't tell the whole story. I don't list the lies, the expenses, or the beach photos. I just say this. She left thinking she found better. I stayed and found peace. And that's enough. Because I don't owe the world an explanation for how I healed. I only owe myself the truth of what I endured and the pride of how I overcame it. So here I am, 39, divorced, rebuilding, and happier than I ever was in that marriage. Some people chase beaches while burning bridges. Me? I've learned to build on solid ground. No more borrowed trust. No more forced smiles. No more fake forever. Just me, my dog, a skyline view, and the quiet certainty that I will never let someone write me out of my own story again. Not even for paradise. The call came just after lunch, right as I was staring out of the 20th floor window of Echelon Global's Midtown office, watching the world churn beneath me. The traffic, the people, the ceaseless motion of a city that never stops to consider who just lost their footing. I thought it might be Brielle checking in about dinner plans or maybe dropping a hint about where she wanted to go for our anniversary, some new place with sculpted plates and 12-course menus that charged extra for air. But when I answered, I heard it in her voice before she even spoke. The smirk. "We're downsizing," she said, sharp and breezy, like she was commenting on the weather. "Today's your last day, unless you want to stay on as janitor. Floors need mopping." Behind her, I heard Myra's unmistakable cackle. Cold. Cruel. Loud enough that she wanted me to hear. That meant it wasn't just business. It was personal. My wife's sister had hated me since the day I stopped paying for her Pilates classes and called her out for borrowing one of Brielle's business cards to expense a vacation. She was the type who smiled at funerals, mostly to check out who was grieving harder than her. I stared at the skyline, forcing my voice to stay even. "Thanks for the amazing offer." Brielle laughed like she'd won something. And maybe she thought she had. In her mind, it was probably some final blow. After all, she was the queen now. CEO of a global firm. Wearing tailored power suits and clinking glasses with venture capitalists who didn't care what lives they steamrolled. She had the title, the spotlight, the nameplate on the mahogany door, and apparently enough pettiness to fire her own husband like an intern with poor hygiene. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the fallback plan I'd been nurturing like a quiet ember in the back of my mind for months. She didn't know about the private studio apartment I kept across town, the one where I did my real work, the kind of work Echelon ran on, the kind of work she paraded around as hers in board meetings. She didn't know that while she was busy stepping over people to pose for glossy magazine interviews, I was building something no publicist could spin, no press release could capture. And she sure as hell didn't know that the reason she could even hold her head high in those shareholder meetings was because of the predictive analytics engine I'd coded, refined, and perfected. An engine that was never formally transferred to Echelon in any signed document. It lived in their systems, but it had my fingerprint all over it. And now, I was the only one who could truly navigate its core without capsizing the entire ship. I wouldn't bother coming home either, Brielle added casually. "We've changed the locks." Myra said it was time. She didn't hang up immediately. She waited. Like she wanted to hear me crack, to scream or beg or lash out with the kind of desperation that would prove her superiority. But I didn't give her that. I never had. That was part of what made her hate me toward the end. I didn't need her money, and that was an unforgivable crime in Brielle's world. So I simply said, "You've made yourself very clear," and hung up. I sat there for a moment longer, breathing through the silence that followed. The office around me was quiet. Too quiet. As if the building had been instructed to shun me in real time. The digital clock on the corner of my desk kept blinking 12:53. My hands were still on the phone. But inside, something had shifted. I stood up and looked around. The desk I'd once cherished was now just another hollow space with a surface littered with memos, deadlines, and empty coffee cups that symbolized wasted hours. A framed photo of us, Brielle and me, smiling at Lake Como 2 years ago, sat near my monitor. I picked it up, held it for half a second, and then flipped it face down. Let them think they'd humiliated me. The truth? They'd just opened the gate. I took one last glance around my office. No speeches. No long email goodbyes. I didn't need to broadcast what I already knew. The version of me they thought they were firing wasn't the man who was walking out of here. The real me had been sitting dormant, quiet in the corners, waiting. And now, he was wide awake. I slid my phone into my coat pocket, picked up my laptop, and opened one specific folder, one that only I could access with a biometric key I'd coded myself. A heartbeat sensor tied to my Apple Watch, a redundancy system that bypassed firewalls, and a self-erasing algorithm if anyone but me touched it. I smiled at the screen. It still worked. Then I deleted it. The core script. The untraceable, original kernel of the analytics system that powered every major decision Echelon made. The framework still existed on their servers, but without this piece, it would slowly become inaccurate, then unreliable, then useless. A digital time bomb. It wouldn't explode immediately. It would unravel. A 0.25% missed here, a projected growth curve that didn't match results, a partner who lost confidence after one too many wrong data points. No one would know exactly what went wrong, but I would. I closed the laptop, slid it into its sleeve, and picked up the only other thing I cared about in the room. A small, leather-bound notebook tucked inside a locked drawer. My notes. My plans. My freedom. As I walked down the hallway, no one looked at me. The receptionist averted her eyes. The HR manager I used to help prep presentations suddenly found her phone very interesting. But one person did meet my gaze. Damon, a junior analyst I'd mentored since his first internship. He stood at the corner, eyes wide, confusion and sadness written all over his face. I gave him a small nod. He nodded back. That was enough. In the elevator, I finally exhaled. I was free. And Brielle? She thought she'd played the final card. But the game had only just begun. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss, and I stepped into the marble-floored lobby of Echelon Global for what would be the last time. Not that anyone would have guessed. I wasn't dragging a box of personal effects. I wasn't red-faced or weeping into my tie. No storming. No dramatic outburst. Just a quiet walk toward the end of something I had helped build with my bare hands and better intentions. The silence in that lobby was a language of its own. Subtle, suffocating. The receptionist, Marcy, looked up from her desk. Her hand hovered mid-air over the keyboard, then quickly dropped as if she hadn't seen me, as if ignoring me might undo the moment. I didn't blame her. She was just another foot soldier trying not to step on landmines. Word must have traveled fast, eh? Brielle's empire was efficient like that. She didn't just fire people. She erased them. Clean breaks, no fingerprints. I'm sure by now, the official story was that I'd stepped down to pursue creative interests. I could practically hear her PR team polishing the statement. I took my time walking past the glass panels that lined the hallway. Through them, I saw bits and pieces of a world I once cared about. Rooms where I'd brainstormed late into the night, crunched numbers that no one else could decode, and coded entire systems that had become the lifeblood of the company. People looked up from their desks curious. I saw a few stiffen. A few ducked their heads. One or two offered tentative nods. There was no spoken farewell. But I saw something else in their eyes. Not pity, no. Something more rattling. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what this meant. If I could be discarded, someone who'd once shared the corner office with the Queen herself, what did that say about their own security? Their own worth? I didn't slow down. I turned right into the elevator vestibule, past the break room, where someone had left behind half a donut on a paper towel. Strange what your brain picks up when everything's ending. I pressed the button and waited, hearing the soft whirring of cables behind the walls. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast, then hesitant. I didn't turn around until a voice spoke. Mason. I turned. Damon. The junior analyst I'd mentored. Smart. Observant. Loyal in a way I hadn't expected anyone to be in that building anymore. His tie was slightly askew, and his brow was creased with concern. I just heard, he said. Is it true? I offered a small smile. Define true. He looked stunned for a moment. You're really leaving? I was invited to mop floors, I said dryly. But I declined the promotion. He laughed nervously, not sure if it was a joke or not. He stepped closer, voice lowered. This doesn't feel right. You are Echelon. Everyone knows that, even if they won't say it out loud. I'm not Echelon, I said quietly. Not anymore. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. I stepped inside, then turned to him as he hovered, unsure whether to follow or stay behind. I could see it in his eyes, questions he wanted to ask but didn't have the courage to voice. Not yet. If I were you, I said gently, I'd start polishing my resume. Sooner rather than later. He nodded once. It wasn't just gratitude. It was understanding. The doors closed. Down I went, each floor a small exhale, a memory passing. The late-night pizza sessions. The strategic planning meetings that turned into marital arguments behind closed doors. The celebratory drinks after quarterly wins, where Brielle toasted the team and I smiled quietly, knowing the engine behind the numbers was sitting in my hard drive. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, I had shed every layer of pride I'd once tied to that place. My nameplate was already gone, my keycard disabled. But I didn't feel powerless. I felt lighter. Outside, the city hadn't changed. The sidewalks still pulsed with urgency. Horns blared. Tourists snapped photos near the fountains. I stood on the curb with my laptop case slung over my shoulder and my coat collar turned up against the early wind. I didn't call a car. I walked. Not aimlessly, deliberately. 8 blocks later, I reached the Echelon Data Center. A nondescript building wrapped in slate gray panels and obscured behind code-locked doors. I still had one last credential, an analog one. The security guard, an older man named Lester who'd once shared stories about his daughter's softball games, looked up from his newspaper. Hey, Mr. Mason. Didn't know you were stopping by today? Just grabbing a few old backups, I said with an easy grin. He shrugged and buzzed me through. Inside the server room, I moved quickly. No hesitation. I went straight to Terminal C. An old console only a few of us ever used. I plugged in my encrypted flash drive, bypassed the front-facing protocols, and navigated to a buried data cache. Not just files, architecture. Frameworks. Logs that told stories Brielle never even knew were being written. I didn't take them. I didn't need to. I simply deleted one very specific decryption script, a private key that validated thousands of real-time transactions between Echelon and its AI recommendation engine. It would take them weeks to realize what was wrong. By then, clients would start losing trust. Decision metrics would start faltering. And it would all trace back to a ghost script, one I had just erased. I removed the flash drive, wiped the terminal's cache, and left. Outside, the clouds had thickened. A light drizzle kissed the top of my head. I didn't rush. I took the subway downtown, to the studio apartment Brielle never knew existed. A 400-square-foot space tucked above a bookstore, with peeling paint and bad insulation, but privacy no one could touch. Inside, I took off my coat, dropped my bag, and opened a drawer in the corner desk. There it was. The black notebook. Not a journal. Not memories. Blueprints. Plans. Codes. Names. Concepts. It was the foundation of everything I never shared, never trusted anyone with, not even Brielle. Especially not her. I sat down, flipped to the last page I'd written on, and picked up the pen that had been waiting for this moment. They thought they'd humiliated me. Truth was, they'd set me free. The studio apartment was nothing special to anyone else, a narrow room tucked above a bookstore, with creaky floorboards, chipped molding, and a radiator that hissed like it was in constant protest. But to me, it was sanctuary. Freedom. The one place left that was mine and mine alone. No keycard access, no security cameras, no boardroom eyes tracking my every move. Brielle had never stepped foot here. Hell, she didn't even know it existed, which made it the most valuable real estate I had. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my coat over the sagging arm of a worn leather chair, and walked to the desk in the corner, the one that looked like it belonged in a hacker's lair more than an ex-executive's safe house. I slid open the bottom drawer, fingers brushing past a stack of prepaid SIM cards and USB drives until they landed on the black notebook. It wasn't labeled. No names. No logos. Just matte leather and thread binding worn from constant flipping. This notebook wasn't just a backup. It was the real master key. My insurance. I opened it slowly, like a ritual, and the pages bloomed with diagrams, equations, and notes scrawled in tiny, precise handwriting. Charts mapping Echelon's core algorithms. Frameworks I'd coded by hand over the last 5 years. Adjustments no one else could even begin to interpret. Every line of logic, every predictive model that powered their proprietary engine, they all started here. With me. Brielle never asked how the engine worked. Never asked about rights or authorship. Why would she? I was her husband. The man in the shadows who made the magic happen so she could take center stage. She'd been too busy dressing up our story for investors to worry about the fine print. The irony was poetic. She built a fortress on sand and never once stopped to test the ground beneath her heels. And now, I had a choice. I could destroy Echelon from the outside with a single coordinated leak. A few emails, a handful of internal documents, and a demo of how unstable their projections were without my code would be enough to trigger an internal audit and a public relations disaster. But that wasn't what I wanted. Revenge wasn't the point. Not really. I wanted to build something better. I flipped to the tab section marked Nova. That was the code name I'd given to the project, the one I'd been sketching out in the stolen hours between midnight and dawn, long before Brielle ever picked up her first investor. Nova wasn't just another analytics tool. It was the next generation. A self-learning, ethics-compliant intelligence engine that adjusted its projections based not only on market behavior, but on sentiment, socioeconomic variance, and individual context. Something more human. I ran a hand through my hair and pulled my laptop onto the desk. No Echelon servers. No dependencies. This system lived locally. I powered it up and watched the Nova interface bloom across the screen. Smooth, clean, elegant. The login screen pulsed gently. I tapped in my credentials and was greeted with a quiet chime. Welcome back, Mason. 3 new messages blinked in the corner of the dashboard. I clicked through them. The first was from a hedge fund in Singapore that had heard whispers about a new black box product being quietly tested among independent VCs. The second was a meeting request from an executive at Hyperion DataWorks, a former Echelon client I suspected would be very interested in what Nova could offer. And the third was from someone unexpected. Alton Morrow, CEO of Luminar Ventures. A man who'd once called me a quiet genius during a panel discussion on the future of AI in business. He was one of the few people who saw me, not just the public version of me Brielle used like a trophy husband, but the actual thinker behind the curtain. The message was simple. Heard what happened. If you're ready to build, we should talk. Coffee? My office. No suits, no games. You pick the day. I stared at the message for a long moment, then opened a tab and looked at the calendar. This wasn't luck. It was alignment. A signal that the path I'd drawn wasn't a fantasy. It was real. Achievable. I stood and walked to the window. The city stretched before me, sprawling and indifferent, lit up like a living organism. Somewhere in that maze of steel and light, Brielle was probably sipping champagne with Myra, celebrating their little coup. Maybe she thought I was crying in a hotel lobby or begging some attorney for a bridge loan. Let her think that. I sipped cold coffee left from earlier that morning and returned to my desk. I started assembling a folder. Not just code vision. A roadmap. What Nova could do, what it would cost, who it could serve, and how it would redefine what data intelligence meant in the next 5 years. This wasn't just about proving I could survive without her. It was about proving I was always the one driving the engine. By midnight, the outline was complete. I packaged the folder into an encrypted file and set up a meeting invite for Alton Morrow Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. No suits, no games, just 2 people who understood the battlefield. I stared at the invite for a moment before hitting send. Then I leaned back, arms behind my head, letting the tension ease out of my spine. The world had shifted, but I hadn't collapsed under it. In fact, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not because I had a team behind me or a corporation cushioning my fall, but because I had clarity. Brielle thought she'd cut me off from everything that mattered. What she'd really done was hand me the match while standing in a house of paper. The real work began now. And this time, the empire I built wouldn't have her name anywhere near it. Alton Morrow didn't do small talk. That was the first thing anyone in the tech space learned when they crossed his path. He was blunt, unfiltered, and terrifyingly intelligent. The kind of man who made power moves in jeans and loafers, who could glance at a dashboard and know which direction the market would lurch 3 quarters from now. If Brielle was the queen of flash and posturing, Alton was the architect of substance. That's why I picked him. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't send an email. I just showed up. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Kyla, raised an eyebrow when I walked into the glass-paneled reception area of Luminar Ventures, holding nothing but a black thumb drive in my palm and a look that said I wasn't here to beg. She looked me over, then picked up her phone and whispered something. A beat later, she nodded once and pointed down the hall. He said clear his schedule. Go on in. Alton's office wasn't showy. No marble. No abstract art hung, just to impress. Just a long window view of the skyline and a single desk, steel, clean, precise. The man himself was leaning against the window frame, sleeves rolled up, a ceramic mug in one hand, and a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. I figured you'd come eventually, he said, voice low and cool. Didn't think it'd be this soon. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and held up the thumb drive like an offering. I've got something to show you. No strings. Just facts. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Then show me. I plugged in the drive, opened the encrypted folder, and let Nova speak for itself. First, the framework, an interface that visualized behavior patterns not just by raw data points, but by emotional resonance, sociopolitical context, and trust weighting. Then the model's self-correcting engine, coded to recognize its own blind spots and retrain in real time without human prompt. Finally, the projection module, how Nova could forecast market shifts not just based on metrics, but by anticipating human decision patterns days, even weeks, ahead. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just watched, eyes sharp and unwavering. When the final module closed, he leaned back and whistled. You built this. Every line of code, I said. And you're telling me this didn't come from Echelon? I never signed over IP rights, I replied. Everything they use is a shadow of this. A half-baked version built off my early drafts. He tilted his head. And Brielle? She doesn't know. She thinks she burned the bridge, I said. But she forgot I built the river first. He let that hang in the air for a long moment. Then he smiled, just enough to show teeth. You could break them. I met his gaze. I could build something better. He nodded slowly. Now that's a better game. Alton stood and circled around the desk, hands in his pockets. You know, when I first met you, you were the guy standing behind her at those expos, adjusting her mic, watching the screens. Quiet, polite. She called you her support system. Said you were brilliant, but not business-minded. She never minded my mind when it paid for her first office lease. I said, voice calm. Alton chuckled. Well, she's about to learn the hard way what happens when the support system goes solo. He sat on the edge of the desk. Let's talk about rollout. About funding. I've got a team of engineers who can work in a blackout zone. A legal department that can draw circles around her before she even gets out of bed. And I've got capital, Mason. Real capital. I nodded. I want autonomy. No shadow control. I'm not handing over another brainchild to someone else's ego. You won't, he said. You'll be the face this time. And the hands. And the spine. I exhaled slowly. Then we moved now. We talked for 2 more hours. About strategy, about deployment, about how to build something that wasn't just a reaction to Echelon, but a complete paradigm shift. Not a clone. Not a copy. A challenger. One rooted in everything Echelon had lost. Real trust, real transparency, real ingenuity. By the time I left his office, the sun had dipped below the skyline. The city was shifting into its twilight rhythm, but I walked differently now. No longer as the discarded husband Brielle thought she'd exiled, but as the man who had built the bones of an empire and was now drafting something stronger from scratch. Outside the building, I paused under a flickering street lamp, the air sharp with the smell of rain and ambition. I pulled out my phone and opened an old folder of Echelon press clippings, photos of Brielle at launches, and panel discussions, in luxury hotels giving statements about innovation and legacy. Always her name. Always her smile. My fingerprints hidden behind the velvet curtain. Not anymore. I tapped the screen and started a new document. A list of names. Engineers, analysts, strategists. People I had mentored, collaborated with, or quietly supported behind the scenes, many of them now disillusioned or outright discarded by Echelon. The cast-offs. The ignored. The ones who built the foundation but were never invited to the top floor. They'd be the first ones I called. They knew the truth. And they were hungry to build again with someone who saw them. I walked 2 blocks to a late-night diner, ordered coffee, and opened my laptop right there under the buzz of cheap lights and old vinyl booths. The Nova framework was already humming. I pulled up a new interface and began outlining what we'd need for Phase 1. Server load testing. Private beta clients. Legal architecture for ownership and release rights. I didn't need to destroy Brielle to win. All I had to do was give people something real to believe in. Something she could never offer. Something I'd always held in my hands. It was easy to forget how many people Brielle had discarded on her way up. She wore ambition like armor, sharp and shining, and she didn't mind stepping over bodies to get to the next stage. But the thing about discarded people is, they remember. They talk. And when someone finally shows up with a different kind of plan, one that doesn't involve egos and power plays but respect and opportunity, they show up too. My mornings started early now. No corporate commute, no tailored suits or sterile boardrooms. Just black coffee, a plain t-shirt, and a whiteboard already littered with diagrams and timelines before the sun fully rose. The studio apartment transformed overnight into a nerve center. Cables snaked across the floor, laptops hummed with simulations, and empty takeout boxes were stacked like trophies. It was messy. It was human. It was real. And it was working. Within days of my meeting with Alton, things began to move. Not in the flashy, PR-heavy way Echelon liked to operate, but in a way that had weight. Quiet meetings in co-working spaces. Midnight video calls with engineers in Berlin, Toronto, Sao Paulo. People I had once worked beside in the trenches, now eager to join a movement instead of a machine. They were tired of being cogs. I gave them keys. Nova was no longer just a concept. It was breathing, learning, iterating. Every day we added new layers. A modular trust algorithm. A consumer-side transparency panel that would let clients see exactly how their data was used. No more black box. No more guesswork. If Echelon was flash and illusion, Nova would be fire and glass, bright, hot, and impossible to fake. But building the engine was only one part of it. I needed people. Not just programmers and coders, but storytellers. Strategists. People who could see past the numbers and understand what Nova meant for the world. That's when I called Marin. She had once been Echelon's lead UX designer, until Brielle sidelined her in a reorg that replaced talent with trend chasers. Marin had an instinct for experience, a sixth sense for what users needed before they could articulate it. I sent her a simple message, "Let me show you something worth believing in." She replied with 3 words, "Send the address." When she arrived, her eyes scanned the chaos of my apartment turn lab and instead of flinching, she grinned. "Looks like you're actually doing it." I nodded. "Want to help build something better?" Marin rolled up her sleeves and joined without a second question. One by one, they came. People Brielle had pushed aside, bought out, or overlooked. Not because they weren't talented, but because they made the mistake of not worshiping her. We called ourselves Project Lantern, because we weren't here to burn bridges or burn down old empires. We were here to illuminate the path forward. By the 3rd week, I had 15 full-time team members and 3 venture meetings scheduled. Alton stayed hands-off, just as he promised, but I felt his support in the rooms he opened and the names he whispered in the right ears. Still, it wasn't just about the launch or the product. There was a deeper satisfaction in reclaiming something that had once been mine, my voice, my identity, my damn name. I started reaching out to former Echelon clients, not to poach, but to explain. Some didn't pick up. Some listened, curious but hesitant. But a few. A few asked questions. The right ones. And I answered with clarity, without bitterness, and backed by facts. I showed them what Echelon's predictive system had been doing over the last 6 months, how its accuracy was declining, how it was recommending suboptimal targets, how the very algorithm they trusted was degrading from the inside. And then I showed them Nova. Not the full system, just enough to make their eyes widen. A prototype demo, real-time sentiment mapping, ethical guardrails that could be audited. One exec, a woman named Cassie from a major retail platform, leaned forward after a 30-minute Zoom and said, "Mason, this is going to change everything. When can I get on the beta list?" I didn't need 1 million customers. I needed 10 who believed in what we were doing. But even as we built upward, I couldn't ignore the past. Not because I was stuck in it, but because it still had my fingerprints all over it. So I made an appointment. With a law firm Alton's people recommended. I walked in with my notebook, my laptop, and my thumb drive. I left with something much more valuable, a fully registered patent. My name. My code. Timestamped. Ironclad. I didn't rush to use it. I didn't run to the press. That was Brielle's style. I tucked it away. Quiet. Ready. Because I knew the time was coming. While I met with engineers and brainstormed UI frameworks with Marin, I kept an ear to the ground. I saw the whispers online, forums where developers discussed how Echelon's output was acting weird or not matching the model accuracy anymore. I watched as minor influencers, the kind Echelon used to pride themselves on swaying, began to talk about other options. New players, open systems, better data ethics. Brielle was still doing interviews, still hosting her champagne mixers, still laughing on stages in her silk dresses and buzzwords. But underneath it all, I could see the cracks forming. That's what happens when you build a throne on people's backs and forget that one day, they might all stand up. One night, around 2 a.m., I was sitting on my windowsill, nursing the last of my coffee, when Meyer's name popped up in a news alert. Echelon expands into wearable data tracking. Privacy concerns raised by tech watchdogs. I laughed out loud. Because of course they were doubling down on invasion disguised as innovation. But it was coming. Soon, she'd be sitting at a table she didn't even realize I'd set. Soon, she'd see that the man she thought she erased had never stopped writing. He just picked a better pen. And it would be my signature, mine, that marked the beginning of her end. The conference room was all sharp lines and silence. Glass walls, chrome finishes, matte black leather chairs spaced around a sleek obsidian table that looked like it belonged in a Bond villain's lair. It didn't smell like money, it reeked of it. Fresh cut wood. Espresso. Some subtle cologne engineered to convey dominance. I'd been in rooms like this before, but always beside Brielle. Never across from her. Never opposite. Today was different. 12 people sat at that table, men and women who could write 8-figure checks without blinking. They didn't come for pleasantries. They came for vision, for opportunity, for power. And I had all three. At the head of the table, I stood beside Alton Morrow, who introduced me not as former Echelon executive or tech architect, but simply the man building the future. He knew what he was doing. Words matter in rooms like these. He didn't want them seeing me as Brielle's shadow. He wanted them to see me as the light. A presentation played behind us. Marin's design, simple, bold, elegant. Nova's interface moved like liquid glass across the screen, cycling through demo slides, real-time trust metrics, adaptive behavior models, full transparency audits. I didn't pitch like Brielle used to. No buzzwords, no ego, no pretense. I told the truth. We're not selling you a product, I said. We're offering you a foundation. The systems most of you currently use are aging beneath the surface. They're brittle. They're optimized for performance metrics that are outdated before the quarter ends. Nova isn't just predictive, it's perceptive. It's built to understand behavior as it happens, not after the fact. They leaned in. Some nodded. One jotted something in a leather notebook. Then the doors opened, and the air shifted. The click of heels. Confident. Sharp. Measured. Brielle. Draped in navy blue silk, jaw locked tight, lips pressed into a blade of a smile. Her assistant, some blonde kid who looked like he was barely out of business school, followed 2 steps behind, whispering urgently. She ignored him. When she saw me at the front of the room, her stride faltered for half a beat. Just half. But I caught it. Everyone did. She hadn't known I'd be here. Her eyes swept the table, landing on Alton, then flicking to the screen where Nova's logo rotated like a quiet warning. Mason, she said. I turned slowly, keeping my posture relaxed, my voice calm. Ah, Brielle. Didn't expect to see you here. It wasn't mockery. It was precision. I met her with the same cool detachment she'd once used to fire me over the phone. The room waited. Every breath held like glass about to crack. She started, but Alton cut in smoothly. Perfect timing, Brielle. We were just walking through the core differentiators between legacy analytics platforms and Mason's Nova system. Fascinating stuff. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then recovered. She smiled that press-friendly smile and stepped forward, voice lacquered in charm. Well, I'm sure it is, she said. But some of us still believe in the systems we already trust. Stability matters. Until it doesn't, I said. Especially when the underlying IP is compromised. Her eyes flared, barely perceptible, but enough. The others glanced between us like spectators at a high-stakes chess match. They didn't know the history, but they could feel it. Something electric. I walked slowly around the table, fingers grazing the back of a chair. I used to sit beside Brielle, I said. Built the system she rides on today. But what most of you don't know is, I never signed over the original architecture. The engine that powered Echelon's rise? The one still running their models? It was mine. Always was. A pause. The kind that chokes a room in tension. Alton leaned forward and slid a folder onto the table. Thick. Sealed. We'll be acquiring full integration rights to Nova, he said. Including the underlying analytics system. Mason's engine. You could feel her mask slipping. Just slightly. Her fingers twitched. Her smile tightened. That system is proprietary, she said carefully. Only if you can prove it, I replied, reaching into my case and pulling out a second folder. I slid it across the table toward her. This might help clarify your legal exposure. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, patent paperwork. Timestamped. Digitally certified. My name. Not hers. Not Echelon's. The silence became a living thing. Her assistant leaned over her shoulder and whispered something again. She didn't respond. I watched her jaw move, tight, grinding. She closed the folder slowly, methodically. Mason, she said, voice low now. Can we speak privately? No, I said. We're not in private anymore. Because this was the moment I'd been walking towards since that phone call. Not a scene of vengeance, but a reckoning. She'd humiliated me in front of an entire company, locked me out of my own home, laughed when she thought I had nowhere left to go. And now, I was standing between her and the future, a man beside me. One of the investors, a gray-bearded financier who'd built 3 tech unicorns, cleared his throat. How soon can Nova be operational? I didn't look at Brielle. I looked at him. Beta testing starts in 3 weeks, I said. Full deployment by the next quarter. He nodded. Put me down for 40 million. Another voice chimed in. Then another. Brielle didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there as commitment after commitment stacked around her like bricks. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because I'd already won. And the best part? I hadn't needed to shout or scheme or burn it all down. All I had to do was build something worth standing behind. And sit at the head of the table she never thought I'd reach. She thought the shock was seeing me at the head of the table. She thought that was the twist, Mason, the discarded husband, standing beside her biggest rival, flanked by the very investors who used to hang on her every word. She thought that was the moment where the camera would freeze, the score would rise, and the audience would gasp. But that wasn't it. That was just the opening scene. The real surprise was what came next. Brielle had remained standing long after everyone else settled back into their seats. Her expression had softened into a professional calm, but I could see the tension in her neck, the way her fingers coiled tightly around the folder I'd given her. I'd seen her wear that face during merger calls when she was bluffing with numbers she didn't fully believe. It was the same face she wore the night she convinced me to let her pitch my early prototypes under the Echelon name, just to help us get some traction, she had said. Alton tapped a finger against the folder he dropped earlier, the one detailing the Nova acquisition. As discussed, we'll be taking full integration rights, including analytics architecture, client access frameworks, and future licensing privileges. He leaned back in his chair like a man who already knew the board vote was unanimous. The valuation was finalized this morning. Brielle's voice came out tight. Valuation? 500 million, I said, casually, as if we weren't talking about $500 million worth of intelligence infrastructure. We closed the term sheet before this meeting. Someone across the table let out a low whistle. Another investor smiled to himself, already running numbers. I turned to Brielle. Her eyes were locked on me now, no longer pretending to smile. No longer playing gracious. You can't sell what belongs to Echelon. I'm not selling anything that belongs to Echelon, I said calmly. You would know that if you'd ever taken the time to understand what we were building. You remember that stack of contracts I gave you 2 years ago? The ones you handed to Myra to sort through? You never signed the transfer clause. Legally, the architecture remained mine. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her brain was trying to catch up with her pride. Alton opened his own folder and slid a second document across the table. Here's the kicker, Brielle. This deal doesn't just move us forward, it protects us retroactively. Mason's system has been running at Echelon without a signed transfer of IP rights. Which means you may have unknowingly exposed your firm to unauthorized usage claims. Brielle's eyes flicked to her assistant. He looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. There's no way, she whispered. No one's ever questioned the system. Because it worked, I cut in. But only because I kept it stable from the back end. Every time your output started drifting off target, that was me fixing the code through an access key I buried in the developer log, one that expires tonight, by the way. The room went silent. She swallowed, visibly. Then, as if desperate to reassert control, she said, "We'll take this to court." "You're welcome to," I said, gesturing toward the thick folder she hadn't dared open fully yet. "That's my patent paperwork. Filed, timestamped, verified. The metadata alone proves origin. And even if you tried to dispute authorship, your own system logs, dated commits, login trails, developer notes, all point back to me. and they're already archived with my. I leaned forward. Yes, you did. You just thought you'd be on the winning side. The investors remained silent, watching her unravel. No one was coming to her defense. No one was offering a lifeline. She wasn't the queen in this room. Not anymore. She was a name on a receding headline, and everyone here knew it. Then I pushed one final document across the table. This is a courtesy, I said. A full summary of Echelon's current liability, including usage of my system since the date of the unsigned transfer clause. Retroactive licensing could save you a PR crisis, provided you come to terms by Friday. Her lips moved like she wanted to argue, but there was no argument to make. The walls she'd built weren't made of steel. They were made of glass. And now the sunlight was pouring in. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You planned this. No, I said. You did. I just kept the receipts. It was true. Every decision she'd made. Every time she sidelined someone for daring to question her. Every contract she ignored. Every bridge she burned while I sat quietly behind her had paved the road to this moment. She was so sure she didn't need anyone else. So sure she could twist the truth into any shape she wanted. But code doesn't lie. Ownership doesn't forget. And signatures? Well, the ones that aren't signed have consequences too. Alton rose from his chair. This meeting's adjourned. We've got contracts to finalize. The investors stood slowly, murmuring among themselves. Some glanced at Brielle with a mix of curiosity and detachment, like watching a magician caught using cheap tricks. She didn't move. Neither did I. Once the room cleared, it was just the two of us. I stood and looked down at her. You used to say I didn't understand power, I said. But I do now. Power isn't control. It's trust. It's knowing your value, even when someone else tries to erase it. She blinked quickly. The first crack of real emotion passed through her face. Why didn't you ever fight me before? She asked. Because I believed in us, I said. Even when you didn't. I walked out without looking back. The hallway felt longer than usual, but lighter too. Outside, the sun cut through the skyline like a clean blade, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. This was my story now, and I had just turned the page. The call came just after midnight. I had just shut my laptop, the glow of Nova's latest interface still lingering behind my eyes, and was about to pour myself a quiet drink when the screen of my phone lit up across the table. Unknown number. But I knew. Instinctively. Some part of me recognized the weight behind the silence, the tremble in the digital air even before I answered. Hello, I said. There was a pause. Then her voice. Mason. Brielle didn't sound like herself. Gone was the confident, calculated woman who could sell sand to the desert. Her voice cracked slightly on the syllables, and for a second, I thought maybe it was an imposter. But no, there it was. That falter beneath the breath, the one I'd heard only twice before, the night her father died, and the night her IPO almost collapsed before we patched the numbers behind the scenes. You can't do this, she said quietly. You can't. Mason, we built that system together. I sat back in the armchair by the window, the city glittering faintly beyond the glass like it had no idea a war was ending inside a single conversation. We didn't build it together, I said. I built it. You branded it. You're rewriting history, she snapped, her voice sharpening. You used my connections, my platform, my capital, and I used my brain, I said flatly. We both brought something to the table, Brielle, but only one of us tried to flip the table over. She was quiet again, but I could hear her breathing. Fast, unsteady. That was rare for her. She'd made a career out of pretending nothing ever rattled her. I didn't think it would go this far, she said finally. No, I agreed. You thought I'd break. Crawl back. Settle for mopping floors while you tossed champagne on the balcony. That wasn't me, she said, like it mattered. Your voice was on the call, I said. Myra laughed in the background. And you didn't stop her. I was angry. No, I cut in. You were arrogant. There's a difference. Her silence then was telling. Waited. She knew it too. I lost sight of things, she said softer now. I kept climbing, and somewhere along the way I forgot how we started. I forgot what you gave up. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how long it had taken her to admit something that had been choking me for years. You didn't forget, I said. You ignored it. There's a difference there too. Mason, listen. No, I said again, firm now. You don't get to frame this like a misunderstanding. You fired me over the phone. You locked me out of the house I paid for. You paraded me as the tech mind behind Echelon until it stopped serving your narrative. You used my work, my trust, and my silence. She was breathing harder now. So what do you want? Is this about revenge? You've made your point. You've humiliated me, Mason. You've won. I didn't want to humiliate you, I said. If I did, I would have gone to the press with everything. I would have leaked internal documents, old emails, broken the story wide open, and made you the villain in every headline. I didn't do that. Then what do you want? She whispered. I looked out the window for a long moment. I want you to learn the difference between being powerful and being respected. She didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was hoarse. Please, Mason, just tell me what it would take to make this go away. And there it was. The thing I never thought I'd hear from Brielle, desperation. Not the kind that clawed and fought. The kind that wilted. The kind that came after the free fall, when you realized your parachute was stitched together by ego and guesswork. It's already done, I said. Nova's secured. The contracts are signed. Your access is gone. The system you're still using will degrade until it's unusable. I've given you the courtesy of a retroactive license to avoid litigation. You can take that. Or not. She sounded smaller when she asked, and after that? After that, you figure out who you are without pretending to be the smartest person in the room. Another pause. Then, finally, you really hate me now, don't you? I closed my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but clarity. No, I said. I don't hate you. I pity you. She gasped a little at that. Maybe she'd been bracing for venom. But this cut differently. Because it was clean. Honest. I loved you, I said, the words surprisingly steady. Not the brand. Not the business partner. You. I wanted to build a life. A legacy. But you wanted something shinier. Something that needed me quiet and convenient. I let that sit. Mason. I didn't respond. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time, I believed she meant it. But I didn't say anything back. Some silences are necessary. Some silences are healing. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said finally. I already did, I replied. It was never about beating you, Brielle. It was about becoming myself again. Then I ended the call. No flourish. No final blow. Just silence. I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair, staring at the skyline. For the first time in 2 years, I felt the quiet settle in my chest, not like a weight, but like a breath finally let out. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't revisit old files. I didn't reach for a drink to chase down the echoes. I just sat there, and I slept deep, uninterrupted, and dreamless for the first time in years. Because some battles aren't won with swords. Some are won the moment you realize you don't need to fight anymore. It didn't take long for the headlines to come. 3 days after our last conversation, the digital world cracked open. It began with a whisper. A niche tech blog published a piece titled, Echelon's engine may not be its own. It was the kind of headline most readers would scroll past. But the people who mattered? They didn't scroll. They clicked. They read. They dug deeper. By the end of the week, it wasn't just blogs. It was Techline, Business Current, The Wall Street Sentinel. Whistleblower reveals IP theft inside Echelon Global. Former CTO alleges unauthorized use of proprietary code. Predictive giant facing lawsuit over system rights. I hadn't filed a lawsuit. Not yet. But word spreads fast when the foundation is cracking. The rumor alone was enough to trigger panic. By Friday, the board called an emergency session. I didn't attend. I didn't have to. I got the play-by-play through back channels, texts from former colleagues, industry insiders, even 2 of the investors who had backed Brielle during her ascension. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Brielle was asked to step down. Effective immediately. Myra went with her. Apparently, she tried to defend Brielle during the meeting, tried to redirect the conversation toward market confidence and forward vision. But it backfired. One of the board members reportedly asked, if you're so confident, why was your sister using a system she didn't own? Myra stammered. And just like that, the show was over. There were no cameras. No dramatic walkouts. Just 2 women who had spent years building an empire of image, escorted quietly out of the building by security. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. Because it wasn't a victory. Not really. It was closure. The morning after the announcement, I stood on the balcony of my new office. It wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. It had tall windows, natural light, and the kind of quiet you earn, not purchase. My team was already buzzing downstairs. Marin was holding a design review. 2 engineers were running diagnostics. And Damon, who I'd finally invited to join Nova full-time, was fine-tuning our data hygiene protocol with a level of focus that made me proud. They were building something honest, and they trusted me to lead it. That was the real win. I sipped my coffee and watched the city hum to life. Billboards flashed. Buses roared down avenues. Somewhere, someone else was getting blindsided by betrayal, by ego, by the kind of miscalculation that costs more than money. But not me. Not anymore. At noon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Lock access termination confirmation. It was from a security firm I'd hired weeks ago, the day after Brielle changed the locks on what had been our home. The email was brief. Per your request, all biometric and keycard access to the former residence has been disabled. Systems have been rekeyed to your private signature. You are now the sole property owner on record. I read it twice. Not because I was surprised, but because I wanted to feel what that truly meant. The locks they changed to keep me out? They were guarding nothing worth keeping. The house was a shell now. She had left it behind when the board ousted her. My attorney handled the paperwork quietly, transferring the deed after an unpaid tax violation surfaced. Echelon had covered a lot of Brielle's personal costs. Once that dam broke, the unraveling was swift. I could have sold the house. I still might. But for now, it stood as a quiet monument. Not to what we lost, but to what I survived. Later that afternoon, I walked into the old Echelon headquarters. Not as an employee, not as a visitor, just as a man returning to a place that no longer held power over him. Someone else's name was on the door now. A new interim CEO brought in to stabilize the company and mitigate the damage. A damage control expert. He didn't know me. Didn't need to. I didn't stop. I didn't knock on old doors or peer through glass walls. I just walked the perimeter once, breathing in the sterile, lemon-scented air of a company trying desperately to pretend it wasn't bleeding. There were whispers in the halls. Familiar faces glanced at me, then looked away. Not in shame, just recognition. Like they knew I had seen the inside of the storm and walked out unburned. Outside, I stood on the same sidewalk where I had once carried my laptop in silence, fired by the woman I built a future with. Back then, I felt erased. Now, I felt whole. I took the long way home, not because I had anything to prove, but because the air was crisp and I had time. Time to reflect. Time to breathe. Time to finally believe that I was free. And the funny thing? I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Brielle. Not at Myra. Not even at myself. Because for all the destruction they tried to bring into my life, they also gave me something I couldn't have discovered otherwise. A reminder that power taken by force can always be taken back. But power earned through integrity, resilience, and relentless truth? That's unshakable. Let the headlines keep circling. Let the analysts debate the fall. Let the investors reassign their loyalties. As for me, I wasn't watching anymore. I was building. And every brick, every line of code, every honest conversation with my team was a new beginning. A beginning no one could take from me. Not again. The wind was gentler than usual that morning, cool, dry, tugging at my coat as I stood across the street from Echelon's old headquarters. The sun had just climbed over the skyline, throwing soft gold light across the upper windows. There was a new logo above the entryway now, sleek, minimalist, expensive. A name I didn't recognize, some acquired brand with no soul behind it, just a placeholder until the building reinvented itself again. I didn't cross the street, didn't get any closer than the sidewalk. I didn't need to. This was no longer my war zone. No longer the place where I'd ground my fingers against a keyboard at 2 a.m. to salvage another earnings report. No longer the stage for whispered betrayals, for watching the woman I loved slowly twist into someone I didn't recognize. No longer the pedestal I once stood on, only to find the foundation had been rotting beneath me. I took one last look at the building, then turned away. Closure didn't need fireworks. My new office was 5 blocks east, modest, intentionally underdesigned, tucked inside a repurposed industrial building with exposed brick and coffee-stained floors. You had to buzz twice at the entrance and walk past a bookstore to find it. That was how I wanted it. No marble. No nonsense. Inside, my team was already working. Damon was on a call in the open meeting space, a notebook full of scribbles in his lap. Marin was half sitting on a desk, chewing a pin cap while reviewing wireframes with one of the developers. Everyone was moving, alive, humming with energy, not because someone was watching, but because they believed in what we were building. Because they had a stake in it, a voice in it. That's what Nova had become, not just a product, not just a platform, but a philosophy. And the difference was this. People weren't afraid to speak here. I walked past the coffee machine, dropped my bag on my desk, and slid open the drawer. Inside was a pin. Nothing fancy. Just a black matte fountain pen I'd bought for myself the day the Nova acquisition closed. I hadn't used it yet. Until now. I pulled out the folder on my desk, something I'd been working on for weeks in the background, the roadmap for Nova 2.0. It wasn't about expanding the client base or maximizing margins. It was about evolution, about widening the scope of what behavioral analytics could do, using it not just to understand consumer patterns, but to help people make decisions that aligned with their values, their mental health, their long-term goals. A partnership between AI and agency, not manipulation, collaboration. I clicked the pen open and signed the top page with a quiet stroke of ink. My name, my vision, not hers. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a moment, letting the hum of the office settle around me like a second skin. This wasn't what I thought success would look like. It wasn't penthouses or headlines. It was peace. It was walking into a space and not bracing for impact. It was not checking the door twice, not wondering who was whispering behind your back or pulling the strings just out of view. It was knowing that the people around you weren't afraid to say your name out loud. That you could be human here, flawed, evolving, but present. A knock sounded at my glass wall. I turned. Damon stood there, holding up 2 coffees and an envelope. "Mail for you," he said, stepping inside. I took the coffee with a nod and opened the envelope. It was from my attorney. Inside, final confirmation that the last remnant of my IP dispute had been closed, sealed, and settled. No residual claims. No litigation pending. My name, officially and permanently, was attached to every line of code that built Nova. And Echelon? They'd signed the licensing agreement for retroactive use just 1 hour before the statute ran out. Quietly. No press release. No statement. They folded the same way they rose, strategically, surgically, without apology. Damon watched me read it, eyebrows raised. "Good news. The best kind," I said. "The kind that doesn't need to be shouted." He grinned and tapped the coffee cup. "You know, this whole thing's been kind of cinematic." I smirked. "You've been watching too many documentaries." "I mean, come on," he said. "Guy gets blindsided by his wife, fired from his own company, disappears for a while, and then comes back swinging with something better. That's a screenplay waiting to happen." I shrugged. "It's just life." He looked around the office, at the team scribbling on whiteboards and typing through meetings, then back at me. "You really don't feel like rubbing it in?" "Why?" I said. "They already know. And I'm not writing this story for them anymore." He nodded slowly, then turned to leave. "Still, if you ever need someone to play you in the movie, let me know. I've been practicing my calm but devastating monologues." I laughed. A real one. When he left, I turned back to the window, my fingers running along the edge of the signed page. I thought back to the man I was that day Brielle called. The man who stared out an office window, blindsided, heartbroken in two, told by the woman he trusted most that he was disposable. That man didn't exist anymore. I didn't want him back. I was the man with the pen now. The man who rewrote the ending. And more importantly, the one writing the next chapter. Not for revenge. Not for approval. But for peace. For purpose. Because I learned the hard way, success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about finally remembering who you are and choosing to be that person every damn day without asking for permission. Outside, the city pulsed on. But inside, I was still, whole. And this time, I held the pen.